Regarding Men, Episode 30. Miley Cyrus Saves the World.
Well, hello everyone. Good to see you again. I was absent last week because of illness and not because of lack of interest in discussing the issue of male circumcision, as I think some people thought. I was very interested actually in that topic and would have enjoyed being part of it because it's a very important subject. But I couldn't speak at all. So Tom and Paul made the decision to go ahead and do it. And so maybe we'll have opportunity to discuss that again at some point in the not too distant future. Anyway, but here we are again, and I'm Janice Fiamengo, obviously, and I'm with Tom Golden of Men Are Good and Paul Elam of A Voice for Men and an Ear for Men. And today we're discussing an article that's been making the rounds. Some of my friends on email have sent it to me. It's one of my friends suggested that it made a good companion piece to the article by Susanna Danuta Walters from the Washington Post some time ago now. I think was it as far ago as 2017, called Why Can't We Hate Men, which was simply pure, unhinged man hatred expressing itself in the elite pages of the Washington Post, saying that men were responsible for all that is bad in the world. And now we have another article called, well, it's a very long title, Miley Cyrus's split with Liam Hemsworth isn't just celebrity gossip, it's a blow to the patriarchy. And the subtitle, Women Like Cyrus are speaking out about sexuality in ways that put the power and responsibility back into their own hands. The article claims, on the basis of absolutely no evidence or argument, believing, I guess, that such things are really not necessary anymore when your point is that men are bad. The article claims that a number of disparate, unrelated events, including a number of celebrity tweets or comments, the shootings in Dayton and El Paso, as well as the suicide of Jeffrey Epstein, somehow show that heterosexuality is on the verge of collapse, whatever that would mean. That women en masse, I don't know if this is wishful thinking on the part of the writers, on the part of the writer. I suspect it is wishful thinking, that she's projecting her own lesbian sensibility onto all women. Heterosexuality is about to collapse. It's having a kind of nervous breakdown. Women en masse are recognizing that they don't need heterosexuality, and they are about to all leave it. To leave behind their dependence on men. They're recognizing that heterosexuality is at the source of their global oppression, as she says at one point. So the writer is a woman named PhD, named Marcy Bianco. She's associated with Stanford University. She's writing for a publication called NBC Think, which publishes opinion pieces. She shows a very sad inability to make any kind of coherent argument whatsoever, but she does certainly insist over and over again that the death of heterosexuality is at hand. So there it is. And she says things like, really measured, nuanced, thoughtful things such as men continue to harass, rape, and kill girls and women. That's, the story of men. Forget about the fact that men can continue to power our world civilization, that men continue to sacrifice themselves for women and children in all sorts of ways, that men invented civilization and created an invisible army to keep it working for the benefit of women. She doesn't acknowledge any of that. Somehow the fact that two very privileged celebrity women have made anodyne statements about how they're exploring their sexuality in ways that are not strictly falling within the parameters of heterosexuality. She sees this as some kind of wake-up call for all women, and as signaling that, all men had better realize that their days in the limelight, their days of exercising oppressive power over women are at an end. And that's it. Yes, it's just full of calumny and ridiculous slanders, absolutely unsupported by any kind of evidence, as if women themselves are not violent in relationships, as if lesbian relationships are not themselves often very violent, as study after study shows. I mean, it's just full of so many lies and sleights of hand. I'm getting myself all worked up and angry about it, and we haven't even really started looking at any of the specific statements. So, the fact that this article gets published in NBC, a supposedly sober purveyor of news and opinion. Yeah, well, exactly. Yes, along with the Washington Post, the fact that this woman is a PhD, like Susanna Walters, presumably with a very heavy ladling of feminist indoctrination in her schooling. It's dismaying, and it signals to me that we're entering even a new phase of even more bald and more overt and ugly man blaming and man hatred in the wider mainstream media.
One of the things that occurred to me in reading this was, in fact, that there's not a lot of this that is new. If you look at a lot of the more radical second wave feminist culture, with people like Andrea Dworkin, Kate Millett, and others, you see this notion that heterosexual sex is oppressive to women, that it is in fact rape, that the idea was asserted that women cannot meaningfully, in a patriarchy, cannot meaningfully consent to sex, therefore all sex is rape. The RadFem Hub of a few years back brought that notion again, breathed life back into it with the term PIV, or penis and vagina sex is all rape, that women just can't give consent. And, it's really funny to me that they made it a point, they put it between hyphens in the article, that this was not only about freedom, but responsibility. And I searched in vain for a word of responsibility in that entire article. What I found was more man-blaming, more second-wave feminism rehashed. And I'm sure with the decline of heterosexuality in our culture, that the sales of heterosexual pornographic material are going to decrease rapidly, and the porn market's going to end because nobody's interested in heterosexual sex anymore. Maybe not with women like this. Another thing to point out is that part of this article focused around the relationship of Miley Cyrus in breaking up with her husband, as though that were somehow a blow against the patriarchy. The promise of the article was not fulfilled. There wasn't even really an attempt that I could find in the article to explain why Miley Cyrus divorcing her husband and being with a woman or opening up more about her gender identity was somehow a strike against the patriarchy. What I found fascinating was they quoted Miley Cyrus as saying that she married her husband because she felt like he was the one person that had her back. And I'll bet you the farm that was absolutely true, that he was the one person who had her back. And I also note that Cyrus did not say, I had his back, or a word about what she brought to the marriage. It was, he had my back, and then I no longer need him, so he's disposable. The absolute self-aggrandizement and all that behavior and the whole angle of this article, to me, is just, it's an expose on feminist mentality. It really is. It's all about me, selfish, and even to the point of, I'm going to turn my personal life choices, I'm going to politicize them and describe them as some political victory. It's almost like, okay, if I sleep with women, then that's a blow against the patriarchy. And if I dump my husband, that's a blow against the patriarchy. If I take up knitting, that's a blow against the patriarchy. Anything I do, any choice I make, anything that defines me as a person is somehow this grand political strategy, and we're going to win with this. It's like, hello, let me know when you get tired of being for.
And she can get away with it because she's talking about patriarchy, which she never defines. And no feminist really has ever defined it, at least in my book. It's this mythical thing that you can say anything about. Oh, patriarchy is suffering because of such and such, but you don't know what the hell patriarchy is. I mean, this article was so infuriating. She'd say things in it that were just so incredible. Like, here's a quote. Where men seem to never have to take responsibility for their actions, women always must take responsibility for not only their actions, but for the actions of men.
I gotta ask, which ass did she pull that out?
A big one. It's just like, it's so opposite. It's so completely on its head. This is Alice in Wonderland all over again.
Pure projection. I mean, it indicates a disordered mind that is so completely out of touch with reality that, and it is, if this was someone's personal rantings, fine. She does write quite well, apart from the fact that none of her statements are true. But the fact that some editor at NBC Think thought this was fit to print, when it makes statements like that, what does she mean by that men never have to take responsibility? When you can be a man who has a one-night consensual affair with a woman, you can be a man raped by a woman and find yourself responsible for paying for the child that is produced because of that sexual union for 20 or 25 years. How is that men not being forced by the patriarchy to be ultimately responsible, whereas women have all sorts of choices about whether they want to be responsible or not for the child that is produced from that sexual activity? They can abandon the child, they can abort the child, they can abandon the child, they can give it up for adoption, they can do whatever they want to do. They can force the man to pay for the child. They can not even tell the man that he's the father of the child. They have all sorts of choices about what degree of responsibility they want to take. Men don't have that choice at all. What is she talking about? I mean, it really is. And I agree with you too, Paul, that thing about Miley Cyrus. She chose to marry the man that had her back. So she chose to marry the person out of all the people that she had come into contact with in her life who was most devoted to her. And as you said, not a word about what she owed him. And apparently she has a quotation in some statement that she made about how she was going to be carefree but not careless. And this is supposed to be some major statement of feminist empowerment. I'm sorry, caring for other people is part of what it means to be a responsible adult. Being carefree, that's a prolonged adolescence. That has nothing to do with empowerment. Supposedly women, care for other women, and men only care about oppressing women. Her idea that patriarchy, that men need heterosexuality because it is how they exercise power over women. Right. She never defines that. She never proves it. Maybe it's about men caring for women. Maybe it's about men's emotional desire for and need of women. She never considers any of that, and the fact that men have labored throughout the centuries to create spaces where women and children could be safe. It really is quite incredible.
Something else she mentioned in the article, brought up a point, was somehow asserting the idea that a woman's sexuality was separate and distinct from her choices in partnership. Mm-hmm. You know what that told me? It said, that's like saying, okay, I know I'm a lesbian, but I can find a man to take care of me and express my sexual life in other ways and still use him. And I'm drawing that parallel directly out of Cyrus's statement. This is almost, it seems like what she did. But think about that notion that the idea of my sexuality is separate and distinct from my choices in partnership in life or who I marry. What do we say when gay men get married as a cover? We criticize and condemn them for that. We tell them, it's like, what are you doing? Aren't you living a lie with somebody? And now what she's asserting in this article is that it's part of women's empowerment to live that lie. Mm-hmm. This is really just the ramblings of a child. And what I will bet, as I have with so many feminists, feminism to me is currently defined by a lack of fathering. I never met a devout feminist who had a good relationship with their father. And I know that there have been, I think a lot of those end up like Janice Fiamengo. There's a phase of feminism and then they're seeing through it. And part of that, I think, comes out of fathering. But I would bet that of all these radical women, that their relationships with their fathers were garbage. For one reason or another, parental alienation, perhaps a bad father, or bad fathering, who knows? But this perpetual childhood that we're mislabeling as feminism was never better showcased than what I've seen in this article.
Yeah, it sort of sums up, and it also it shows the hold that academic feminism, I think, ultimately has had on the wider culture. The old truth that what starts in academia, unfortunately, doesn't stay in academia. As you said, Paul, all of these ideas about heterosexuality as a social construct, yeah, right. Mm-hmm. It's successfully populated the earth for millions of years, but it's just a social construct. Women have been.
Well, it's not fair to bring that up, Jane.
Yeah,
well,
I know.
And that's what she says. She says it's not fair to bring that up. Here's a quote: "Patriarchy is at its most potent when oppression doesn't feel like oppression, or when it's packaged in terms of biology, religion, or basic social needs like security, comfort, acceptance, and success." So she's literally saying, don't be fooled, girls, by biology. You're still oppressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She's twisted it so that she can't be wrong.
Right. She's never
literally
be wrong.
Twisted it so she can't be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Never. Oppression, I love that. Oppression is at its most potent when it doesn't feel like oppression. Yeah. What kind of oppression doesn't feel like oppression? Maybe because it's not oppression. Maybe that's why it doesn't feel like oppression, because it's actually something that serves social needs and emotional needs, and that has benefited women for centuries. It's incredible. But these outrageous theories, some of them, honestly, sort of interesting and more complex than she's able to express them, have been developed by people like Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde, some of the people she mentions, and of course Andrea Dworkin, who was unhinged but an interesting writer, and Sheila Jeffries and all sorts of people. They were interesting theories articulated in the 1970s and 1980s, outlandish and wrong, but
Yes.
they were there in academia. Now, unfortunately, they have taken hold in the wider culture, so they can actually be published as if they have some kind of general legitimacy in the wider culture. And yeah, it's really amazing. The other thing that's striking about the article, with this insistence on the personal as the political, every time a woman divorces her husband, it's somehow a blow against the patriarchy. Although, of course, any woman who is benefiting from social services of any kind, she is still exploiting men. She is exploiting men's hard-earned tax money, which has gone into creating the social safety net that makes it possible for her to make these kinds of choices and to consider herself an independent woman, unless, of course, she really is a hugely wealthy superstar like Miley Cyrus. But the average woman who benefits from the social structures that have been created to protect women is still exploiting men. She is not exercising her independence. I mean, it's such nonsense. But aside from that, if you look back, I mean, that's throughout history, but even back in the early 20th century, elite people have always experimented with their sexuality and considered it some kind of liberation. You know, you can go back to Vita Sackville West and her affair with Virginia Woolf, and the Bloomsbury group of artists and writers who imagined themselves subversives and so superior to, you know, the ordinary people who are living their humdrum lives. And that was all about being married, but experimenting outside of marriage with same-sex relationships and expressing themselves and expressing their avant-garde, you know, energies in this way. There's nothing new about this in any way. It's actually a sign of decadence, is what it is. To imagine that it has some kind of profound political import. It's the clear sign of a decadent culture. And to pretend that it's anything more is just self-delusion.
And unfortunately, that sign of a decadent culture is also a sign of a culture on its way to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think too that it's a sign of a culture that is strong enough to provide safety for people doing dumb shit.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like, and that's what's going to lead to the collapse.
Yep.
Is where, you know, we've got the resources to provide something where people can do what they want to do, and people are making some dumbass choices. You know, like this writer. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And
And
we should never forget that modern feminism, the second wave as we know it, was generally started, you know, people like Betty Friedan was started by women who had spare time because of affluent husbands. And I mean, not to paint too cruel a picture of it, but we're talking about groups of women that were sitting around swimming pools, eating bonbons and having mint juleps, and decided let's have a revolution.
Yes.
And by the way, hubby will pay for it.
And the corporations chipped in. Why? Why did those corporations chip in?
Consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because they could sell more product.
And look at what they delivered in the end, is that we have really, when you look at the promise of feminism, which was about freedom and being happy and adjusted and fulfilling your life, we have 2 generations of absolutely miserable women.
Yes.
Who have basically been relegated to life in and most of them at mid-level management or best, sitting around missing their kids with bags under their eyes at jobs they hate, barely making ends meet, but they're obedient consumer units as long as you tell them this is empowerment. And that is what feminism has produced and nothing more. And it's why feminists are so freaking miserable overall.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's why this article feeds people like that. You know, it's like food. It's like feeding them. It's crazy.
Yeah, you know, and it tells people that, that you know, making a lot of bad choices and behaving badly in general is something that should be applauded and, you know, and emulated by other people. It's so irresponsible.
And they do it. They applaud it and emulate it.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. Women's choice.
Yeah.
It's a woman's choice to choose a man that's going to beat the crap out of her. And then it's a woman's choice after she takes him into the DV place within a year to choose another one that does the same thing.
And then it's her responsibility to become a lesbian.
Not only that, but she blames men. Everyone blames men. Oh, these bad men. No one says a damn thing about how maybe she made a poor choice. She chose poorly. You know? No one says anything about that. I've never heard a thing said about how women are choosing poorly. But if 50% of divorces are out there, women choose the relationship, right?
Yeah. No, you're not allowed to discuss anything in our society that may suggest that women are responsible
or accountable.
You know,
which is the exact opposite of what this woman says, you know. Women are not only accountable for themselves, but for what men do. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, if that's true, why is it that's one of the main planks of feminist activism right now is to introduce into law all sorts of stipulations whereby women are not responsible for the choices they make in sexuality? So that, you know, a woman who has a couple of drinks is no longer responsible for her consent. Feminists themselves, they're overt about saying that women are not responsible for, they're not able to consent if they've had a drink of alcohol. So how can you claim then that women are reclaiming their responsibility? Reclaiming, I mean, reclaiming would imply that women ever had responsibility in the first place or ever had power, which presumably contradicts everything that feminists believe anyway about the past. But I mean, it really, yeah, the article sort of sums up what 40 years of feminist thinking has produced. And it is very overt infantilization of women and mass blaming of men in the most crude, hurtful, and hectoring of tones. And I mean, it really is, as my friend Paul Nathanson has said, this is really identity harassment. Women talk endlessly about, and we in our culture talk endlessly about sexual harassment, as if a man calling out, "Hey, love you in those shorts," is going to ruin a woman's life for 6 months or something. But you know, this is identity harassment blaring out from the pages of so-called sober news organs, saying that men are no good. Men are responsible for everything wrong in women's lives, and women should abandon men en masse. Women should leave their husbands. Women should reject men's romantic overtures. Women owe men nothing. Women owe themselves everything. Men owe women everything. I mean, it really is a poisonous message. And I mean, you know, we've got to start calling it out for what it is.
I call it a bobblehead culture. We have feminists that sit around and they say, we make women responsible for everything men do. And their heads, and then you got a whole room full of heads saying, yeah, that's absolutely true.
In group bias.
And then they publish it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that phrase.
The lack of awareness in this is stunning. It is absolutely, the lack of self-awareness is mind-blowing.
It's brainwashing.
Yeah, the lack of humility, the arrogance of it. This is what happens when you tell generation after generation of women that they've been oppressed and they've been held down and everything that is wrong is a fault of men. And it really does produce a monstrous ego that we see on display here. It's very disturbing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, really, really horrible. So women and men need to start speaking out against this kind of nonsense.
And wasn't it something that there was no comment section for this article?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think there would be a lot of very telling response.
I would love to see the comments.
But unfortunately, they're making sure that there aren't any.
They know better.
Yeah. So that's why this woman deserves our Flying Puta Award.
Indeed, she does.
Yeah.
Fly away.
This is really a remarkable instance of just
of hate.
Can I take the liberty to name a Flying Puta runner-up? I agree.
A runner-up. This is a first.
A Flying Puta runner-up. Men.
Ooh.
This stuff survives largely because men are of the mentality that you're supposed to just give women whatever they want. And I don't care what they write about. None of that matters to me. It doesn't matter in my life. Well, guess what? It does. It really does. And it is men's enabling. This woman is allowed to be a flying puta, largely because of men in this culture. And we have to call that out too.
Yes.
I think it's equally important to point out, where does the enabling come from?
Yeah, it's a good point.
So we salute you too, guys.
We'll have 2 putas this time.
Yeah. Well, may not qualify for a double puta because this woman stands alone as a
Yeah, okay, we'll leave her alone.
It's amazing.
Fair enough.
But it's only because men are enabling this that she was ever allowed to publish this garbage or that it's taken seriously.
Good point, boss. So who gets the humanitarian?
Well, I think we should give it to Daphne Patai, who I believe actually still calls herself a feminist. I haven't seen her writing lately, but she's written a number of really important books about the ills of feminism. And the one that's most relevant in this case is her book called Heterophobia, Sexual Harassment and the Future of Feminism. Yes. And she really calls out feminism for its lies about sexual harassment and about the supposed oppression of women in general. And her point is that what feminists are intent on making by introducing sexual harassment legislation into academia and into schools and workplaces is a nightmare of totalitarian surveillance and coercion, far worse than even the very worst imaginings of a feminist dystopia, of male power. She recognizes the harms to men in a culture where anything a man says or does can be called out and therefore subject of discipline and punishment, even if it's as innocent as asking a woman out on a date. And so and she sees the underlying theory, the hatred of heterosexual relations that's at the base of this kind of fear-mongering and hysteria. It's a really, really good book, Heterophobia by Daphne Patai, Sexual Harassment and the Future of Feminism. And it counters this kind of nonsense. I would love to see her write a response to Marcy Bianco.
So Daphne, if you're watching, write one.
Thank you for that.
Good one.
Yeah, maybe we should write one too.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, our response here in this discussion will have to suffice.
And it does. And it does. It's been a good conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Are we finished?
I guess we are.
We are finished.
All right. Men
are
good.
Hold it. Start that one over.
Men
are
good.
All right.
There we go.
Fair enough. You all take care.
Take care, guys.
We'll see you next time.